Well, I first of all, I want to thank you all for being here, and happy Pride. This is going to be a month filled with lots of activities all over the city, and I think it gives us another opportunity to make sure that the issues and concerns of our community are heard. I obviously feel a particular responsibility as the city's first openly gay mayor to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to advocate and to lift up issues of concern in the community. And we can talk about these issues, and anybody who knows me knows that I'm very candid, and you aren't shy about asking a range of different questions, and I don't expect you to pull your punches now. But I want to make sure that the thing that, for me, that's probably most top of mind in light of the draft opinion that was leaked from the Supreme Court is making sure that people in our community understand really the importance of this moment. You know, we've obviously done and will continue to do a lot to educate people about the full measure of the implications of that draft opinion. I don't expect it to be radically different when it's finally issued by the court, and presumably it'll follow the normal course and be issued at the end of this month, as the court typically reserves the end of June for the kind of big, impactful decisions, and I think we'll see that come down. But as you well know, the right of privacy, first recognized by the Supreme Court in Roe, is really the premise for a lot of the recognition of rights in our community. Not just gay marriage, but the striking down the sodomy laws that were so prevalent across many states, particularly across the South, and a lot of the other rights that have flowed, our right not only just to marry, but to be able to have children, be able to pass property down from spouse to spouse. These things that the straight community takes for granted, these are new rights embraced by us. And anybody who's my age, which is almost 60, grew up at a time where we never thought we would be able to have those kinds of recognitions. So the thing that's most important for me and top of mind now is making sure that Chicago remains a city where there truly is justice for all. And it shouldn't depend upon your country of origin, citizenship status, the God you worship, or who you love. I think that's critically important. So I was down in Houston a few weeks back and had the privilege of speaking at the Victory Fund's annual big brunch that they have down there. And the message that I brought to the group there is, if you think that this issue of what's going to happen with Roe only is an issue of concern for straight white women, you are sadly mistaken. All of our rights are at risk by what the Supreme Court may do. And if you look at the briefs of the appellants in that case and the amici who supported them, they've been very clear about the fact that they want to eliminate all rights that were premised upon the right of privacy. And I will tell you personally, one of the things that offended me most, and there was a lot to be offended by in that draft statement, was Justice Alito's, I think, malicious use of the language, quote unquote, phony rights, to talk about our rights and our community. And I think that is a very incendiary and something, frankly, incredibly mean-spirited that we haven't seen coming from the Supreme Court in a really long time. I hope that people will get him to temper that language. I think there's no question whatsoever Roe is gone. It was always, once they got the votes, a question of when, not if. But the implications for the rest of us are so profound. We've got to continue making sure that we educate people and that we are prepared as a city to address what I think are going to be some very significant consequences that flow from it. The folks that are playing to, frankly, the bottom across the country already are making plans, tweeting, trying to pass laws that are going to seriously impinge upon our rights as residents of this country, and we got to be ready. So I'll stop there. As you can tell, this is something I've been giving a lot of thought to because I have great concerns about it, but happy to take your questions.
Thanks, Mayor. Jake?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Jake Whittick. I'm the Vice President of the Chicago chapter of the Association of LGBTQ Journalists. We are an educational group. We look to improve representation and coverage of LGBTQ people and issues. We're open to allies as well. So thank you very much for having us here. We also have a convention coming up in September, which we're very excited about. It's happening here in Chicago. We've been trying to do it for 3 years, and finally it's going to work out. So yeah, very excited. But my question is, what is the city doing in terms of outreach for the transgender community? We've had, last year was the deadliest year on record in Illinois for trans women, specifically Black trans women, and most of the deaths in Illinois happened here in Chicago.
Great question, and I think the most significant thing that we've done is to issue a strategic plan for combating gender-based violence. And the trans community is a big part of that. So Darcy Flynn, who is our gender-based violence coordinator, has spent a lot of time working with advocates all across this space, from gender-based violence, domestic violence, human trafficking, and obviously focused on what's happening with trans women across our city and really across our region. So I think one of the things that we have to do is we've obviously not only issued a strategic plan, but put money in place and frankly, pressing the police department to step up and do more to make sure that they are focused on the abuses that are happening and the violence that's happening against the trans community, which is real and profound. So we keep working on those things, but to me, that's the biggest statement. Using the bully pulpit of the mayor's office, making sure that we're putting our issues front and center, and really pressing the police department to step up and do more, particularly in the areas of abuse and violence against trans women.
Thanks, Mayor. Anyone else?
And I will also say, and doing that in conjunction with a lot of different organizations, not the least of which is Equality Illinois. Brian Johnson is a personal friend, and these are issues that he and I talk about on a regular basis, but making sure that we're talking to the community and getting the community steer on what are the challenges, what we need to do to break down barriers, but also educating the community about what their rights are and what they can expect and demand from city government, from county government, from state government.
Stuckey, NBC.
Hi, I'm Rick Stuckey. I'm the Vice President of Broadcast for the National Organization.
Right. Nice to meet you.
And so here's our style guide and some stickers.
Oh, great.
And the style guide is in both English and Spanish.
Oh,
so I want to say thank you for inviting our organization. I work at NBC. I'm a camera guy, so I'm usually not the guy asking questions. But the one thing that that really stuck out.
There's a joke there somewhere.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. Well, but I also put the V in TV. So, I guess the question, one thing that really struck me at one of the events that we were at was an opening of a grocery store, the Dom's Market in Lincoln Park, and the store owner, store manager, Bob Mariano, was really had inclusive language. And it really kind of struck me that it wasn't anything about LGBTQ issues. It was an opening of a new store. And so what are your thoughts about bringing more inclusive language into speeches that are given when you're out in any community?
Well, I try to do that. You know, I ran on a platform of equity and inclusion in the broadest possible sense, particularly given who I am and what I represent. But I'm going to take your question in a slightly different direction, which is, I think the thing that we've got to do is continue to raise consciousness and challenge all of our communities to be more inclusive in not only the way that they talk, but also the way that they hire and the way that they're welcoming people in the community. It's not a surprise to me that Dom's Market, located on a corner of Fullerton and Halsted, really kind of at in the foot of Boys Town, and obviously servicing a pretty diverse community, would be inclusive. But we've got to make sure that we're raising those standards and challenging business people really all across our city to be doing the same. And I think that, as I said, I try to lead by examples and talking about inclusivity in the broadest possible sense. And some people get it. And I think more people are getting it over these last 3 years. When I first started talking about equity and inclusion when I came into office, a lot of people kind of looked at me with quaint smiles on their face, like, the mayor doesn't really get it. And she doesn't really mean what she's saying. I've seen now in 3 years' time an embrace of not only the language but the actions. Right? It's not enough to say something. What matters is concrete, tangible steps that demonstrate a commitment and an understanding of what inclusivity really means.
Hi, my name is Justin. I'm with The Trace, which is a digital publication covering gun violence. A story I've been working on is in regards to the curfew, the youth curfew. I've been talking to some youth. A week ago, youth with Communities United staged a die-in outside of City Hall. And many of them pointed out research that says that curfews don't actually keep folks safer or curb crime. My question, I guess, is, from your point of view, how does a curfew keep LGBTQ kids safer, especially given their disproportionate susceptibility to violence?
Well, I would say a couple things. First of all, there's been a curfew in place in our city since 1992. And I think that fact got lost in the shuffle of this discussion. The changes that the City Council has now embraced and really validating the executive order that I put in place were pretty modest. Number one is making the time uniform across all 7 days, which is 10 p.m. instead of 11 p.m. on the weekend, extending the scope from 16-year-olds to include 17-year-olds, and then obviously having exemptions for kids that were at work or going to ticketed or sponsored events, because a lot of the work that we're going to be doing over the course of the summer in conjunction with community organizations is sponsored events on Fridays, on Saturdays, and during the week, but at times when we know the violence is, I think we are most challenged by violence, and making sure that there's productive, safe activities all across the city for young people. One of the biggest things that I've heard really is from parents. One who didn't know that there was even a curfew, which is a little concerning. I'm old enough to remember that, particularly in the summertime, you better be in when the street lights go on, right, which was at dusk. And so part of the conversation around the curfew has to be about educating parents about what the rules are and really encouraging them to talk to their children, whether parents, guardians, or caring adults, about what the rules of the road are, and making sure that the kids know that there are rules about when they can be out unaccompanied by an adult. My experience is that most young people, when they're out at curfew, when somebody comes to them and says, "Hey, it's curfew," many of them will say, "Oh, I didn't realize there was a curfew," and then they go on and they go home. So there's not an issue. One of the things that came up is, oh, we're really concerned about the police suddenly arresting all of these young people. But again, the fact of the matter is there's been a curfew since 1992. You're not seeing a number of arrests, which I think is a good thing. What we don't want is the wagons rolling up and we're, putting kids in handcuffs and hauling them off to jail. This is about community norms. It's about educating our kids and their parents, frankly, into compliance. And I saw the reports that were circulated by some of the aldermen, and I will tell you, one of the reports was from Brookings, which is not specific to Chicago, and I can't remember if it was that one or another one, that was from 2016, which frankly, given all that's happened, across the city, across the country, is like 1,000 years ago. What I've also seen, frankly, is data that shows the most dangerous time for young people to be victimized is 10 p.m. That's data from Chicago. That's our data. So we can have an honest debate about whether or not people believe that curfews work, but I think educating and elevating the issue and giving parents, frankly, a tool that many of them have asked for, and then working with our young people, with social service organizations and the like, to get people to abide by the curfew is a net positive for our city. You know, I won't say it in as colorful language as Alderman Irvin did last week, but not a lot of good things happen to young people when they're out late at night without adults in unsafe spaces across our city. And that conversation, I didn't see a lot of the activity that day, but I would challenge you to ask yourself and to ask your readers, what good happens to 11, and in some instances, 10, 11, 12-year-olds out at night without an adult in our city, wherever it is? What good comes from that? I haven't seen much. And quite frankly, quite the opposite. I've seen circumstances where these young people become victimized by people with guns, driving by, getting into arguments, getting into fights. That doesn't make any sense to me. So if it was a curfew in isolation, I might agree with you that it's not really going to do much. But it can't be one tool that we're using. It's got to be multiple things that we're doing, not the least of which is talking to young people about the dangers of picking up guns and why picking up a gun doesn't make them safe. If anything, it puts them further at risk. So look at the data around the victimization levels, who is most likely to be either a perpetrator or a victim of crime, and what are the hours that we're seeing these things happen. I think it will open up your eyes. You may not agree, but there's data out there from Chicago that shows the level of victimization and the times in which this is happening, and it is 10 o'clock and later.
Can I have a follow-up?
Sure.
Do we have time?
Sure.
My follow-up is what's. I think it's interesting that you say, like, let's talk to young people. I think, like, a lot of young folks said we don't really need a curfew, given that there has been a curfew longer than a lot of them have been alive.
Remember when you were a teenager? Did you think you had to abide by any rules?
I do remember when I was a teenager.
I got a 14-year-old at home. She thinks that she shouldn't have to abide by any rules. Look, we do talk to young people all the time, but it is zero surprise that young people are saying, I can take care of myself. I got this.
Okay.
I don't need a curfew.
What's your reaction to young people saying we don't need a curfew, we need mental health resources, we need job trainings, we need actual systemic change in a lot of the neighborhoods? And I also think it's interesting that this curfew was in response to violence that didn't happen after 10 p.m.
Well, that's not really true. My response to the young people who say we need all these resources, yeah, I know. That's why we're funding it. We've tripled the budget in mental health. Yeah. Say it again.
Are we not going through budget cuts in CPS?
No, we're not going through budget cuts in CPS. That's a nice story propagated by some, but it's not actually accurate. And what I can tell you is we've tripled the budget in mental health. Back at the height of when all the clinics were open, you know how many people were actually being served every year through mental health clinics that the city sponsored? Do you know? 2,500. Do you know how many people are being served now? Because we've tripled the budget for mental health resources and expanded those opportunities across the city. Do you know? Over 50,000. So please report that. Young people saying, hey, we need more opportunities to engage in safe, productive activities. Totally agree, which is why the $1.2 billion that we invested starting this year, a significant portion, hundreds of millions of dollars, are specifically focused on youth jobs, youth opportunities. If you downloaded the My Shine, My Future app, do you know what it is? Go to your app store. No, listen, man, no, but here's the thing. You can't come in here and just spit out the pablum without actually doing the work. We are very focused on making sure that this is a city that provides a lot of information and a lot of resources for our young people. If you paid attention to our budget last year, you would see the amount of very specific targeted resources that are available for organizations that focus on youth employment, youth mental health, connecting young people up with opportunities. There's never been another administration in the history of this city that frankly has done more for young people than we have. And I'm very proud of that. And I ask you, do the work. We'll provide you with all the information, but write that story.
We'll go to the other side of the room.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi there. My name is Annie Howard. I am a freelance journalist. You mentioned a little bit earlier.
And you're wearing the right hat.
Thank you. Yeah, that is true. So, earlier you were talking, there was a question on what's being done to take care of trans people in the city and trans safety, and you specifically mentioned, police in your answer. As a trans woman, the police do not make me feel safer. In fact, I have experienced harmful comments from police numerous times. I'm also thinking, kind of in follow-up to that previous question, stories about the Center on Halsted, which is on the north side, closing at 9 p.m., Black young queer people hanging out there and then not having anywhere to go afterwards because it's, after hours and there's not places for young people that are not bars that they can go to safely like adults can. And then they are criminalized by homeowners in the neighborhood for just hanging out and, again, not having anywhere specific to go, but just wanting to stay and hang out and continue to be a part of the community. I think it's maybe a cliche to say that Stonewall was a riot against the police, and I think that is still true. And I'm just curious, is there other things that we can be doing for queer people besides let's bring in police to make sure that queer people are safe, that trans people are safe?
No. And maybe I wasn't clear in my question. I think one of the biggest challenges that I have heard from the trans community, particularly trans women, is when something bad happens, that the police don't take it seriously. So my earlier comment was about pushing the police department to treat trans women's violence against them, and particularly homicides, in exactly the same way that they would for the straight community, and not ignoring this and just saying, well, dangerous lifestyle, this, that, and the other thing, and not putting in the kind of resources and intentionality around solving those crimes that they would anybody else who's victimized in our city. That's the thing that is most important to me. I remember very distinctly, I think I was still a candidate, standing in front of 35th Street Police Headquarters with Quality Illinois and a number of other trans advocacy groups, highlighting, because at that point, my memory is that there were several trans women that had been killed or were missing, and the complaint was that the police department wasn't taking these crimes seriously. So my point was not that the police are going to make everybody feel comfortable. I know that that's not the case, but when something happens, we need to make sure that the police are as diligent in solving crimes against members of our community as they are against members of any other community. That was simply my point.
All I'm trying to say is on a day-to-day, police make me feel unsafe because I live in a neighborhood where there are a lot of police, Bridgeport, and they say things to me, and they make me feel unsafe is all I'm trying to say to you right now.
Well, I hear you loud and clear in that. As a Black queer woman, there are people in the city that say all kinds of things. And I understand it because I live that life every day. But the thing I think we've got to do is to continue, one, to stand up for ourselves and our rights by being united in a community, and frankly, demanding accountability on the people who are supposed to be doing their job and making us feel safe. And frankly, if that is happening to you, I strongly urge you to call up COPA and report it, because we cannot live in a world, and not in this city, not in this time, where we've got police officers who are saying and acting in a homophobic, anti-trans way. The police department swears an oath to the same anti-discrimination policies as employees of the city of Chicago as the rest of us do. And there's no exception. No exception. And if they are engaged in that, then they need to be that needs to be addressed forthwith. So if that is happening to you, first of all, I'm going to say I apologize it's happening, but you have rights, and you have power, and you don't have to tolerate that.
Thank you, Mary. And just a friendly reminder, everyone, one question per reporter, just because we want to make sure that we get to everyone, so I appreciate that. Joanna from WTTW.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you? So as you mentioned, my name is Joanna. So I want to talk because, yes, we're in Pride Month. We have a lot of things to be grateful for. But one of those things, I think, during Pride Month, there's a lot of good things that we talk about, all the accomplishments of our history. But there's still hundreds and hundreds of people who are suffering in silence, who can't come out. What is the type of outreach that the city is doing to help parents or to help these individuals who can't come out, who are suffering in silence? I know hundreds of people where Pride comes, they can't even go to the parade because they can't have this conversation with their parents or their loved ones. What is the city doing? Instead of just putting, yes, Pride, happy, this and that, but there's still hundreds of people who are suffering in silence.
Well, look, I will say this. People have to have to be in their own journey about when and where and circumstances in which they feel comfortable coming out. I don't think that's something that the city can impose upon them. In listening to you talk, it reminded me when I was in law school, which is really where I've kind of fully came out. But there was a guy that was in a class ahead of me, frankly, that would go through the halls and call people out who were still not ready yet for a whole host of reasons. And the fact of the matter is there are going to be people in this city, and your question was really kind of focused, I think, around juveniles, but I think that there's a whole degree of folks of all age ranges that still aren't there. And we live in a very different time now than we did 30 years ago when I was in law school. But we have to respect and recognize that people have to make those decisions for themselves. We don't know, the circumstances in which they live. We don't know the fear in which they may be living about the loss of support from family and friends and loved ones. That fear is real for people. And even though I think we live in a world where, 10 years ago, I couldn't have become mayor being an out lesbian, no chance. I don't think that was a possibility. But our city has evolved and changed in a way that, frankly, for the most part, my sexuality was not an issue in a negative way during a campaign, which was, frankly, remarkable. I was fully expecting. Now, there were some who tried to play that game, and I won't rehash things from 4 years ago, 3 years ago, but think about that. And what heartens me is the number of parents who come up to me still on a regular basis and say, I just want to thank you because my daughter, my son is gay, lesbian, trans, and look to you as a role model. And what I think I hear from parents is they see me and my wife and our child and recognize that life isn't going to be terrible for their child because they're going to live their authentic life, which is as a lesbian, a gay man, a trans person. And the more of us who come out and model the behavior that we want, not only young people to emulate, but to show those family members that they can live happy and fulfilled lives. I think that is one of the things that's most important. I would say the other thing that we have to keep doing is making sure that we're fully supporting with resources organizations that are out there in the community doing that work. It's still a fact that a significant portion of homeless youth are members of our community because their families have rejected them, or they felt like, they weren't getting the love and support. And that fear can be very palpable. It can become your reality. It took me a long time to come out to my parents because I was convinced that my, God-fearing, go to church several times a week, conservative parents were going to kick me to the curb. And I had to get to a point in my life where I felt okay about losing them. And you never feel fine about it, but you've got to muster the courage to feel like you can live a life unmoored from the things that give you support, which is family and friends. Luckily, that didn't happen for me, but that is a journey that a lot of people are on every single day. So it's not for us as a city to dictate the where and when and how people come out and feel comfortable. But it's for us to make sure that when they do, that there is a huge network of support all over the city. I'm going back to the previous question. We've got work to do, I think, in areas of the city that aren't Boys Town or Andersonville. We've got to make sure that there are opportunities for gay, black, and brown youth and young adults to also feel like they can live their authentic life in their neighborhoods and not have to just travel to the north side. There's more work to do. For example, working with State Representative Lamont Robinson and Art Johnson of Sidetrack fame to look at ways in which we can provide resources on the south side to start to address some of those challenges that I think people are experiencing. But it's a complicated issue when you're on your journey to coming out, for sure.
Hi, Jason Knowles. I'm a consumer investigative reporter at Channel 7. So I moved here 18 years ago, and I felt like Chicago was definitely a safe space, and I still feel like it is. But when we look at everything going on in the nation and the attacks on trans rights, back to your opening statements with privacy issues, I don't know what the overall issues are here with bullying in Chicago and hate crimes, I should say, with other people in the LGBTQ community besides trans. But I guess my question to you is, do you still feel like Chicago is a safe space, and does more need to be done as far as like any kind of campaigns against overall hate crimes against the entire community?
That's a great question. What I would say is this, you know, as somebody who kind of traverses several different communities, you know, I look across our city and I see hateful attacks on the Asian community. I see hateful attacks across in the Jewish community, and of course I look at what's happening in our community, and I worry. I think in general we are a safer space for people who are LGBTQ plus. But when I look at what's happening in other communities of difference, it absolutely gives me pause and says to me that we cannot rest, that we cannot think that we're immune, because I think we're not. And again, to me, that is one of the biggest lessons of what's going to come from the Supreme Court, is really sanctioning the hate that is out there. And it makes me very worried and very concerned. So I would say in general, I think we're a pretty safe place, but we've got our challenges, just as we were talking about before. Our youth, I think, are still being bullied in schools, really all across the region, not just in CPS. I think that we've got a lot more work to do to make sure that the racial divides in our community, the income divides in our community are real. And make a difference. It's different if you're a gay white man of money than if you're a working class, poor lesbian or of color. Our worlds are different, but they're not, right? There's a common thread that weaves between all of us, and I think sometimes we don't see that. We get, those of us who have the ability to be comfortable, we get comfortable, and we forget that there's big portions of our community that are still feeling like they are finding their place and not feeling comfortable. So that's a long response to say, I'd say for the most part, I think we continue to be a city where people feel comfortable. I think about this, like I go to market days usually every year, right? Great fun activity on North Halsted. And I know this from when I was campaigning and trying to get people to sign my petitions. There are people literally from all across North America that come here for Pride and market days because they can't live their true authentic lives anyplace else. But here, they can be who they are. They can walk down the street arm in arm, hand in hand with their loved one and not feel like they're going to be singled out, feel like they're not going to be ostracized. I remember that summer of 18 when we were circulating petitions, meeting this group of lesbians. I think they were from Oklahoma. And of course I went up to them and, hi, I'm Lori Lightfoot. I'm running for mayor. We signed my petition. They're like, well, do you have to live in Chicago? I'm like, oh, yeah. I'm like, oh, because we struck up a conversation. And it was very clear to me, they could not live their lives in comfort and freedom where they were from. And I met person after person from the suburbs. There's a reason why the city of Chicago remains this beacon that attracts people from all across our region, but really all across the United States. I met people from Canada, from Central and South America, who are here because here they feel free in a way that they do not in their home country. So that makes me optimistic, but I also know that we got to continue to press and push ourselves and hold ourselves accountable to continue to really see the full mosaic of this community, because not everybody feels the same, not everybody is treated the same in living an out and free life.
Matt Simona at Windy City Times. Can you speak a bit about what is going on with the city's efforts towards HIV prevention and treatment?
Yeah, and I will start, and then I'll invite my friend from public health. This is a huge effort that we are putting a lot of resources and dollars around. In particular, we're very, very focused on the areas of our community where we continue to be the most challenged, and that's in Black and Latinx Chicago, and making sure that we're continuing to educate, particularly this younger generation of folks who didn't grow up in the height of the AIDS epidemic, as many of us who are a little bit older did, who aren't thinking about things in the same way as, frankly, circumstances required us to do. And I don't know if you want to pick up on some of the things that, because really a lot of this funding comes through CDPH, but we have committed tens of millions of dollars to continue to fight this fight, because the battle still rages on. It's less in the news these days because of all the progress that's been made really across the world, but certainly here in the city. But we've got people every day who are really challenged by HIV infections. We put money into housing that has really been supportive housing for folks who have tested positive. So there's a lot, I think, that we have done and will continue to do. Here, let me give you.
Yes, definitely. So we here in Chicago, we're part of what is called Ending the HIV Epidemic. It's definitely a national strategy to end the epidemics throughout, the U.S. As part of that, we have made big strides in reducing HIV infections. To give you some perspective, in the early 2000s, we were around 1,800 new HIV infections on a yearly basis. And right now, as of 2019, we're in the 600 figure. So we have definitely advanced tremendously, and we continue to, aside from providing, prevention and care efforts, we're really honing in on activities that advise us as to what specific communities need. To give you an example is like, we're very interested in learning about community development of communities of high prevalence. We currently have 3 projects that are working with Black and Latino, gay, bisexual, and other men who have sex with men, and Black and Latina trans women, to learn from them, to explore the idea of removing structural barriers that prevent them accessing our services. Since the inception of PrEP for prevention, the biomedical side of things have revolutionized how the infections are materializing in our area. Nowadays, aside from having that, we're really focused in learning from the communities to explore other opportunities that are affecting communities aside from just the chronic disease. What else can we do to support, communities and improve their lives?
So just to add a little finer point on it, our annual appropriation just focused on HIV and HIV supportive programs is $40 million. And as you just heard, it goes to everything from pilot programs, supportive housing, making sure, obviously, that medications are available. We've done a lot of work with Howard Brown in particular to go deep into Black and Latinx communities and reaching them. And they've, frankly, got a lot of skin in the game. They're heavily invested on the South and West sides to work with us in these communities. So we have made, I think, really significant progress, continue to do so. And in fact, our Commissioner of Public Health, and the reason she's not here with us today is that she's in Washington, D.C. for an annual convening of the 37 largest big city public health departments across the country, and this is one of the key topics of discussion for that meeting.
Thanks, Mayor. Mike Lowe.
Hey, Mayor, Mike Lowe with Channel 9. Always great to see you. Thank you for hosting us today. I think you did a really good job of outlining what is the gravest threat to this community, and that is the erosion of rights with the Supreme Court. But I would list as maybe 1A this effort that we've seen play out in school boards and in state houses around the country where they're banning books, they're passing legislation. Don't Say Gay is the famous one, but there are several other examples around the country. We're lucky in Illinois, or at least this community is lucky, that we're one of, I think, 4 or 5 states that has I think it's called the Curriculum Inclusion Act, that mandates that LGBTQ plus history is taught. But I think it's an insidious movement, and you see it almost a coordinated effort using the same language, talking about indoctrination and grooming and those kinds of things. What is your view of that? I know these aren't things that are...
I think you're 100% right to call it 1B, and I didn't list those in the laundry list of concerns, but I think you're absolutely right. When you think about the fact that some of these states are literally trying to weaponize against children, the fact that they are trans, the fact that the false narrative around teaching inappropriate ways in elementary schools about differences in sexuality. This is all, to me, a front to try to attack and unmoor the rights that we believe that we have as citizens of this country. And so when I talk about the disintegration of the right to privacy, that is going to give license, particularly in the really mean-spirited language that the court used in that draft opinion, that is 1,000% going to accelerate the things that we're seeing already happening, the banning of the books, the Don't Say Gay legislation. That's going to accelerate tenfold, frankly, across the South and the border states. I'm very, very concerned about what that's going to mean for families and kids in those states that just want to live their lives. I think they're going to be at risk. I really do.
Hi, Alice of the Tribune. My question is, do you think President Biden is doing everything he can to safeguard LGBTQ and abortion rights against red states and the Supreme Court? And what would be your message to him about what else you want to see?
Look, I think that the president and the people around him understand what's at risk. I really do believe that. But in some ways, I really think this is a locality by locality, state by state fight. The Supreme Court, unfortunately, is what it is. And we could go back and, talk about what happened to Merrick Garland. We can talk about, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But the composition of the court is the composition of the court. Where I'm most concerned is seeing, as Mike just said, what is really happening at the state level. And I do think that there's a bigger role for the Department of Justice to play, but query whether or not, when they get involved, if they file lawsuits, what kind of court system are they going to be litigating those cases in? And that's what really concerns me. You always, I'm a lawyer by training, and I always grew up feeling like the courts you had an opportunity federal courts, not so much state courts, but federal courts, you had an opportunity to get a fair shake. I think the untold damage of the Trump administration with Mitch McConnell is they have loaded up federal courts with people who are every bit as right-wing and activists as what we're seeing on the Supreme Court. And I know this from my own experience as a lawyer litigating in federal courts. Trial court judges have a huge amount of discretion. They are the gatekeepers that determine what evidence comes in and what doesn't. And if they've got their thumb on the scale, they can absolutely tilt a piece of legislation in a very profound way. And as a litigant who's on the opposite side of where the court wants to go, it's an uphill climb. Now, there are tools that you can use, and I won't bore you with all the legal mechanisms, but if you don't have the facts in the record because your court has put his or her thumb on the scale to keep that evidence out, you can appeal all you want, but the record is going to be the record. And if you got a record that doesn't demonstrate all of the facts and the nuances, you're fighting an uphill battle. And that, I think, is really something that we've got to really be thinking about. And frankly, I think that, and again, as you all know, Dick Durbin, our senior senator, is the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. We've got to get more judges confirmed because there's a huge backlog, and we played to some extent, into the Republicans' hands by not having the same sense of urgency around filling vacancies as they have. Because it's those district court judges that are really going to make or break a lot of this litigation when somebody sues, whether it's the federal government, whether it's the ACLU, whether it's Lambda Legal, NAACP, Defense Fund, whomever. They're still going to have to be litigating in a federal bench that is much more conservative now than, frankly, it's been maybe ever, but certainly in a very long time. So I'm concerned about that.
Thanks, Mayor. Grace?
Hi, Grace Del Vecchio, freelance reporter. There's been a lot of discourse, particularly since 2020, about CPD being at the Pride Parade, about CPD being at the Pride Parade. Particularly queer activists and organizers say that they don't want CPD to be there. So has your administration considered doing any community safety conversations, particularly with queer communities in Chicago, and will CPD be at the Pride Parade this year?
I think there will be a presence of CPD at the Pride Parade. Look, it goes back kind of to the discussion that we had earlier, which is there are going to be some people who feel comfortable around uniformed police, and there are going to be some people who feel uncomfortable around uniformed police. But I can tell you, when a crime is committed against a member of the community, when you dial 911, who are you seeking help from? And when members of our community are being discriminated against and again victimized, the police can and must have a role to play. There's no easy answers. That's why we're looking at lots of different alternative forms of support for victims. We've launched 2 different pilots, one with CIT-trained officers, one without them, and clinicians. But when violence happens, I don't know who else you're going to call unless it's the police. And here's the other thing I know from having spent a good part of my adult life looking at these issues from all different corners and perspectives. The way we make police more responsive is to make them more accountable to us, to make them see us for who we are, and to make them reckon with the fact that we are here and we exist and we're not going anywhere. If we continue these fault lines and say, in effect, the police are illegitimate, they always will be, then when we need them, and all of us will need them at some point, we will not have bridged that divide. And if the police are not viewed as legitimate in the eyes of the community, they absolutely cannot be successful. But if they don't also see us for who we are as residents deserving of protection and deserving of communities that are living in peace and working in a lot of different settings, not just with the police, but making sure that the police understand and respect our rights, then I don't know how we make progress and move forward. So again, I hear you, and when you think about the hundreds of participants in the annual Pride Parade, 1 or 2 police cars are going to be like a blip on the horizon. But I also know in talking to members of our community all across the city, and particularly entrepreneurs, restaurateurs, bar owners, people that run community organizations, we can hold 2 thoughts at the same time. And the 2 thoughts are, we want to be treated with respect. That's our right. And as taxpayers, we have a right to demand that the police are not victimizing us and that they're regarding us with respect and engaging in constitutional policing, but also recognizing that there are times when violence flares that we need the police to respond and to investigate and find the people who are responsible for victimizing us. I know from lots and lots of different conversations, lots and lots of polling, that people hold and both thoughts at the same time, and it's unusual if it's one or the other, only one or the other, and not both.
Hey, did you say white gay men bunny or white gay men with money earlier?
You said white gay men with money.
That's what
With
I
money.
heard. Sorry. Yeah.
What did you think I said?
A bunny, which I thought you were making up some kind of new gay
No.
archetype off the top of your head, and I thought surely she knows better than
That's
that.
not what I said.
I want to ask one completely frivolous question, just because I've always been curious. I mean, do you identify with any kind of like lesbian tropes, like liking Melissa Etheridge or Kate Bush or Tracy Chapman or anything like that? I mean, Greg Pratt wrote one article about you 4 years ago, I think, when you were running about gay identity, and we don't really have much else to work off of. I'm kind of wondering how you personally identify with it. If I can ask this before asking one more serious question.
Well, I am a huge fan of music, and I was kind of coming of age as a lesbian when Tracy Chapman was really kind of hitting her stride. Of course, I know Kate Bush, Melissa Etheridge, of course. So I have a very eclectic music taste. I'm the youngest of 4 siblings. My siblings are quite a bit older than me, so they were kids of the 60s and 70s in their music taste. So I have a lot of affinity for 60s and 70s rock and roll too. Of course, R&B. But someday we can have a long conversation about my taste in music, which leave my wife cold, and she takes no responsibility for. But no, I really like powerful women voices. It's the reason why I've always gravitated towards, Ella Fitzgerald, one of my all-time favorites, Sarah Vaughan, of course, as well. I'm trying to think of, really love Marcia Ball, though doesn't identify as a lesbian. There's another woman that, is too obscure that I'm always also forgetting her name. It'll come to me. Say it again.
I said, have your staff send it out to us afterward. Yeah, and more related to this in a more serious note, we're talking about kind of declining federal enforcement. It's going to make state and local enforcement of ordinances a lot more serious.
Yep.
I'm wondering if you can talk about how the city's enforcing its anti-discrimination ordinances and that kind of thing. You passed the wage theft ordinance earlier, it was this year or last year. People still had to report wage theft as it occurred. With the anti-discrimination ordinance on sexual orientation and gender identity, are there investigators going out and investigating this? Do people have to go turn it in? How is this being done? Are you doing any more than last year or your predecessors? Are you funding it better? What's it like under the Lightfoot administration?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people are feeling comfortable making the kinds of reports, and our investigators are out there. That's run by Nancy Andrade and her group. But yes, I think we've been pretty aggressive when we get reports. I mean, the system that's set up we're not a prosecutor's office. We are an investigative body that follows the reports. But when we get the reports, I think we've done some pretty good work. And particularly, you mentioned wage theft. I mean, we've gotten some of the largest wage theft settlements since we passed the legislation in the history of the city. And we're making sure that, again, a big part of the work is educating people about what their rights are, and frankly, making sure that people know that there is an advocate available in City Hall for them, and then making sure that the resources are there for the investigations to be done and fully funded. But that's a big part of what we're doing. I mean, obviously, we take our role as in our anti-discrimination mission. I won't even just say our laws, but our mission very, very seriously.
Thanks a lot to everyone. That concludes our roundtable. Mayor, do you have any final remarks for our guests?
Well, I would just say I appreciate the depth of the questions. I appreciate you all being here. And I also just want to acknowledge that I know it's not always easy being gay and lesbian and transgender in some of the spaces that you occupy. It's not always easy being different in an environment. And part of the reason why I placed an emphasis on making sure that I am supportive of reporters who are different, either on race, ethnicity, or a sexual orientation, is because I think it's really important that our stories get told. And oftentimes, in kind of mainstream media and traditional media, the stories don't get told. They don't get lifted up. And the challenges and struggles of people in our community, which are real and profound, are things that have to be part of the public narrative. And I just want to thank you all for what you do to make sure that happens. And I hope that we have the opportunity to talk again soon, not just on Pride Month.
Hopefully in September for a national convention when we have
Yes.
100 people throughout the U.S.
Yeah, that's going to be awesome. That's going to be awesome. Okay. All right.
Thanks, Rick.
I will
Thanks,
work to
Jake.
get there.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you all.
Have a great day, everyone.
All right. Take care.